Olivia Harrington had learned to curate silence the way a sommelier curates vintages, with sophistication, deliberation, and unerring restraint. The hush in her penthouse was a luxury item, like the Chihuly chandelier that scattered rainbows across imported stone, the temperature-controlled vitrines that protected first editions, the glass that turned night into a canvas of sequins. At 52, she was the woman magazines spoke about in stately fonts. Self-made, impeccably philanthropic, owner of towers that thrust their glacial ribs into skyline light. She had built an empire from a memory and a refusal. Memory of a one-bedroom childhood, refusal to be ordinary. But success, as it turned out, could be exquisitely lonely. The quiet was tasteful, yes, and also tyrannical. It was at a private art auction, that temple of moneyed risk, where an unexpected noise cracked her curated hush. A laugh, low, rogue, alive. She turned toward it with an indulgent smile that almost became startlement. The laugh belonged to Julian Carter. He stood near a painting that looked like storm music, the sort of canvas that seems to remember fire. 28, perhaps, though the confidence complicated the arithmetic. He wore dark denim and the frictionless ease of a man who loved something enough to be poor for it. His eyes, clear, river bright, moved over the room not with entitlement but with curiosity, as though the chandeliers were constellations and he'd never imagined he could walk among them. Olivia hovered at the composition's edge, an impeccably cut silhouette against gilded noise. She was not in the habit of lingering in the presence of strangers, particularly beautiful ones. The painter noticed. "You came close," he said, not in the fawning cadence she expected, but as if discussing a tide that might take or spare ashore. "Does it hold?" "The canvas?" she asked, amused. "Or the feeling under it?" He smiled, unschooled, warm. "The feeling. Paint is only the scaffolding." She let the laugh surprise her. It escaped the tasteful register into something that sounded young. "It holds," she said. "Against reason. Against training." They spoke in parentheses between bids. He told her the storm motif had been a dare against predictability. She told him predictability had paid for every light in this room. He, unstartled, asked what the cost had been on the other side of illumination. The audacity was elegant. She found herself answering, a little. Loneliness language disguised as wit. When the work sold, high, she should have offered a congratulation and resumed the choreography of the wealthy. Instead she followed. He moved through guests like a stone through water, creating a wake of eyes. In the antechamber where serious people pretended to be casual, she let her hand drift across a narrow sculpture and said as if to the room, "The brushwork suggests you know when to stop. And the eyes," he said softly, "suggest you don't." That night, her driver asked whether to take the bridge or the tunnel. She chose the long way, city as necklace, reflections threading water. In the elevator's polished hush, she looked like a verdict. Yet behind the verdict glowed an ember. She poured a measured inch of Barolo and paced to the windows. The sky was a medieval manuscript of lights. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt the oddest variant of hunger, not for acquisition but for risk, for being seen without the armor of legend. On her marble console, the bidding paddle lay like a spent sentence. Olivia touched its number, then her pulse, as though correspondence between the two might be proven by pressure. "It holds," she repeated into the glass, testing how the word returned to her. Somewhere below, cabs stitched gold thread lines through avenues. Somewhere in a smaller apartment, a young man probably counted the spoils and laughed again, unafraid of the echo. She envied his unafraid. She slept poorly, which in Olivia's world meant excellently by any ordinary standard. 3 interruptions, 1 glass of water, no emails returned before dawn. In the gray lavender hour, when the city resembles a secret, she conceded what the night had argued. She wanted the storm, not the frame. By noon, she had an envelope messengered to the gallery. Her card, handwritten across it a sentence that flirted with impropriety by being honest. Lunch to discuss the substructure of storms? Her pen paused. She added, "For the version of the room where people speak plainly." She sealed it before she could become Olivia Harrington again, the one calibrated for optics and consequence. The seal, like a kiss, picked aside. The restaurant was the kind expensively disguised as simple, linen that pretended to be casual, waiters trained in quiet choreography, light falling just so on napery as if heaven had considered interior design. Olivia chose a table near a fig tree. Julian arrived neither early nor late, carrying the electricity of someone who trusts time because he's too busy to quarrel with it. He wore a white shirt rolled to the forearms, no apology for the visible ink that wrote a constellation across his skin. They sat without the usual preface. His smile asked permission to be himself. Hers granted it, a little surprised by how easily. Storm substructure, he said, picking up her phrase as if it were a brush. You meant fear. I meant pattern, she countered, which is fear taught to walk on a leash. He grinned. And desire? Pattern saboteur. The waiter poured water into silence that was not awkward but charged. They traded biographies like shy contraband. His mother taught music, his father traded night shifts for daylight jokes. He had sold coffee and sketches to rent sunlight for painting. She confessed, softly, how success had narrowed her life into an exhibit. People admire a woman who glitters, she said, running a finger around the rim of her glass, but they do not easily forgive a woman who burns. Then burn, he said, as if that chose the problem. She should have laughed. Instead she got brave. Come to my estate this weekend. I'm acquiring for a new tower's lobby. I'd like to see the work unframed by applause. He did not perform gratitude. You want honesty. I want velocity, she said, surprising them both. The Hamptons received them in salt and light, the day articulating itself in clean lines across the lawn. Julian stepped into the guesthouse studio as if entering a cathedral where worship looked like work. He set up canvases, brought out a jar that had once held peaches and now held brushes splayed like sea grass. Olivia watched from the doorway, an observer in her own life. He moved, decisive, unhurried. Paint gathered itself into meaning almost against her will. Come here, he said without looking back. Years of command made obedience feel like rebellion. She went. He offered a charcoal stick. Draw, he murmured. Not the outline of what you own. The pressure points of what you want. I don't. Don't announce your limitations, he said gently. Whisper your attempts. The line wobbled, then steadied. He stood behind her close enough to hear her breath change its music. The studio carried the tenderness of making. When she faltered, he covered her hand with his, and the charcoal found its nerve. She realized with something like panic that this was intimacy. Not exposure but presence uncomplicated by judgment. At dusk he persuaded her to leave the symmetrical dining room for the beach. Barefoot, he specified, amused when she hesitated. The Atlantic was iron blue, shivering under wind-stitched light. Julian chased a wave like a boy. Olivia laughed like someone not watching herself. The hem of her trousers confessed to salt. Her hair loosened into suggestion. They walked until talk fell away and the water's small violence argued its case. He brushed her fingers. She let the brush become a hold. You're not afraid of ruin, he observed. Ruin is merely uncurated truth, she said, breath stirring, and I suppose I've earned a specimen. He turned, slow, studying her the way artists memorize before they touch. You hide like a cathedral, he murmured. Grand, sanctified, locked. I'd like to hear the bells. Her heart struck metal against sky. She should have remembered the world's appetite for scandal, her board's intolerance, the tabloid's patience. Instead, she remembered the feel of the charcoal steadying in his hand over hers, the sensation of being accompanied inside a risk. When he leaned, she met him. The kiss was patient, no conquest and inquiry. She felt her age not as arithmetic but as architecture. Rooms, windows, a staircase of scents. He didn't try to undo the house, he opened a door. Night arrived wearing indigo and heat. Back in the guesthouse they said little. He lit candles as if inviting the air to confess. She stood in their halo, astonished to be luminous without help. He did not press. He painted instead, and she watched herself appear in strokes that loved the imperfect angles. When he finished, he turned the canvas toward her, not a likeness so much as a permission. For the version of you, he said, echoing her first thought of him, they never see. Later, in the hush that follows accurate work, Olivia understood a new and destabilizing truth. Secrecy did not feel like shame, it felt like shelter, an incubator for something tender. She would keep it private not because she was afraid, but because she wanted the world to witness the bloom, not the seed's terror of soil. Their romance chose the hours that do not belong to calendars. Pre-dawns and after midnights, the fragile corridors where intentions change their names. In the city they met in orchestrated anonymity, black cars that forgot routes, elevators that stopped one floor shy, lobbies crossed by way of service halls smelling faintly of lemons. Olivia discovered she enjoyed being imprecise. The woman whose life was a ledger began, thrillingly, to live by metaphor. Julian installed a studio in the guesthouse. Canvases like unrolled futures, a work table ringed with the halos of old paint. When she arrived, he did not court her with applause. Sit, he'd say, and bring tea ungilded by formality. Close your eyes. He blindfolded her once with a silk scarf the color of late cherries. You trust me? He asked, not coy but careful. I employ entire battalions of people to manufacture the illusion that I do, she said lightly. So yes, try me. He guided her over a low threshold. The floor smelled green and damp. Step, he breathed. Glass clicked underfoot, a greenhouse door sealing them into a private climate. He untied the scarf. Wildflowers, immodest, bright, had been smuggled into her tidiness. The air wore the perfume of undone schedules. You always buy perfection, he said softly. Here I planted chaos. It blooms obediently. She reached for a bloom that did not know its price and felt her throat thicken. She had not been given something useless in years. It was priceless. Later she gave him a different gift. Entrance into her public world without admission to its surveillance. A masquerade charity gala, guilt and excess and cameras disguised as chandeliers. She kept her gown architectural, a column of onyx falling like night. He wore a Venetian mask, iron filigreed, that made his gaze a secret within a secret. They moved through the hall as if choreographing a myth no one else spoke. When the quartet reached a waltz, she let him take her hand. The press cameras recorded philanthropy. The room missed the revolution. A woman of legend permitting a man of beginnings to lead her not by class but by cadence. Reckless, she murmured, when his palm found the small of her back with ceremonial boldness. True, he corrected. Let truth wear the mask. After, in a balcony thick with moon and rumor, he drew 3 lines on her wrist with a fingertip, slow, deliberate, like an artist mapping a cathedral's nave. Your pulse argues with your caution, he said. I like debates with good speakers. She breathed in, the air tasting of metal and possibility. My pulse has always been eloquent, she answered. It's my reputation that votes at the end. Reputation intruded sooner than poetry promised. One dawn, a photographer caught the outline of Julian leaving her townhouse. The image was technically nothing, blur, shadow, an anonymous shoulder. But the city is a master reader of suggestion. A gossip columnist wrote, with malicious innocence, that Olivia had discovered modern art and modern artists. Her board chair called to ask whether rumors might affect a planned acquisition. Her daughter texted a dagger hidden in silk. Are you lonely or courageous? Either way, be careful. Fear arrived wearing correct clothes. Olivia retreated into the curated safety of plans, paused invitations, answered Julian's messages with beautifully phrased postponements. He responded with patience that read like knowledge. I will paint. Come when you can. When can widened into won't, he sent no complaint, only an image, the greenhouse riotously in bloom, proof that even neglected chaos finds a way to be faithful. She went that night. The scarf waited on the chair, patient as ritual. You weren't certain I'd come, she said. I was certain I'd ask, he said. There are only 2 honest positions in love, invite and accept. She closed her eyes and let him wrap the silk around her vision. She felt her other senses learn new diction, the faint rasp of fabric, his breath at her temple, the subtle warmth in the air where his body displaced space. He led her to a bench and pressed her hands lightly to the curve of a clay vase. Texture tells truths first, he murmured. Let your fingers read. Later, when sight returned and the room's green vowels reassembled into language, she realized how rare a privilege it is to be guided without being diminished. Power did not have to disappear to make room for tenderness. It could kneel without surrendering its crown. She touched his face, terribly gentle, and he turned his mouth into her palm, sacred as a vow whispered to no one but the night. Truth announces itself in accumulations. 2 glasses on a table that should hold one, a cuff button forgotten beneath a chair, a security guard's friend of a friend anecdote that travels faster than discretion. The city sharpened its appetite, the rumor wooden spooned itself into a story. Olivia's coterie, women who could stint a fortune with a compliment, began to lace their praise with the vinegar of concern. At a dinner where the table flowers were expensive euphemisms, the woman across from her smiled with orthodontic compassion. We must let ourselves have our refreshments, she murmured, as if speaking about lemon water and not a man. Midlife courage is terribly chic this season. Olivia fielded the line with a blade hidden in velvet. Some of us have been courageous for 4 decades, she said mildly. Seasonality bores me. Laughter. The sort that means point conceded and wound delivered. She went home to a view that always agreed with her, and found the agreement suddenly unbearable. Julian arrived without the insulation of invitation. He came like weather, swift and definite, into her penthouse where art slept like tamed wildness. He took in her immaculate life, everything folded, distilled, buffed, then looked at her. He had the look of a man who has painted for many hours and come to a color that finally told the truth. "Do you want me," he asked, "or the clandestine architecture that keeps me from touching your consequences?" She steadied her breath. "I want both," she said. "I want to be free in private and untouchable in public." "That's a museum," he said. "Not a life." She should have dismissed him for insubordination, commissioned 3 murals and penance. Instead, something cracked, gently like ice in spring. He crossed the room, the city poured light behind him like molten silver. He framed her face in his hands with an artistry that asked permission even as it promised certainty. When he kissed her, the windows became irrelevant. Her mind, trained to function like a ledger, forgot columns and counted only heat, tilt, breath. He did not hurry the moment. He expanded it, turning a kiss into a room with many doors: tenderness, question, vow, dare. When they parted, her eyes stung, not with shame but with relief. "You are reckless," she whispered, because the word had always terrified her and now it sounded like oxygen. "Not reckless," he said. "Attentive. To what is already true." He took her to the roof. She had built it as an amenity for buyers, had never used it as a human. The city's wind unpinned her composure. "Tell me a fact," he said. "Not an accomplishment." She hesitated, and then, because she understood what honesty demands, she offered a soft, unmarketable sentence. "I hate sleeping in king-sized beds," she said. "They feel like diplomacy." He laughed, astonished, affectionate. "We'll stage a rebellion," he said. "A bed exactly the size of 2 people telling the truth." A day later, the gossip column lost its coyness. "Queen of Towers topples for boy wonder?" Not witty, only hungry. Her board chair called. Her daughter, protective and uneasy, asked whether the man loved her or her gravity. Olivia sat at a table strewn with documents that could command nations of concrete and felt suddenly like a girl asked to choose between a father's approval and a dare to dance. She had coached other people through storms. She realized, with a clarity that chilled and warmed, she was finally in one. That evening she returned to the guesthouse studio. The canvases held color like a secret. Julian looked up from a work in progress that did not flatter her. It regarded her. "Choose," he said softly, gesturing not to himself but to a place beyond them, an horizon where she would belong to a truer sentence. "Not me. You." She walked to the painting. In it, the woman was both armored and alight, a paradox human enough to move her throat. She lifted a hand toward the silk scarf draped over the chair, the one that had taught her to be guided. She picked it up, let it fall through her fingers, and then did something small and enormous. She knotted it around her wrist like a vow. "I will not be curated by cowardice," she said, voice steady. "But I will be careful with what is tender." He nodded, relief mixing with devotion. Outside, the greenhouse breathed its wet green breath. Inside, the silence changed species, from tyranny to shelter. When she went to him, it was not to disappear but to appear, and when he drew her close, it was not conquest but communion. The kiss this time tasted of decision. The first fissure appeared not in their bond, but in its reflection. Olivia had always known society would eventually lean in with sharpened ears. What she underestimated was the cruelty disguised as camaraderie. At a luncheon framed by crystal and orchids, her oldest confidant leaned close, perfume heavy with suggestion. "Darling," she said with honeyed menace, "you've earned every indulgence." But, she let the word linger like smoke. "Remember, youth admires itself in mirrors. Be certain he admires you." The table tittered. Olivia, who had trained her face to be both fortress and facade, smiled with immaculate calm. But her pulse betrayed her, skittering against her wristwatch. She left the gathering with compliments clinging like burrs, her reputation now a chessboard rearranged without her consent. The tabloids arrived next. A blurred photograph, Julian leaving her townhouse before dawn, found its way into a gossip column. The headline smirked, "Steel Queen and her storm boy?" The article speculated with merciless cheer. Was he her protégé? Her lover? Her midlife experiment? Each question was a blade disguised as wit. Her board of directors noticed. Investors murmured. A shareholder asked during a call whether her personal distractions might affect institutional stability. The irony stung. Men of her age paraded ingenues without consequence, while her quiet tenderness became an existential threat to skyscrapers. The pressure carved cracks between her and Julian. She canceled their weekend by the sea, citing urgent meetings. She postponed dinners, claimed fatigue, silenced her phone when it pulsed with his name. He responded with patience at first, short, steady messages. I'm painting. I'll wait. But patience eroded into silence. His canvases grew dark, storm-laden, as though her absence had taught him the colors of grief. One night she stood in front of his painting, acquired under another's name, hung discreetly in her private study. It was wild, scarlet colliding with black, a storm devouring itself. She reached out and touched the paint's texture, rough as sorrow. Her fingers trembled. She realized she had not only abandoned him but abandoned herself. In her penthouse, walls of glass framed a skyline that once felt like triumph. Now the city resembled a jury. Her solitude returned with vengeance. She understood something devastating. She had mistaken secrecy for safety, when in truth it had become a weapon of fear. Julian returned like a storm refusing exile. He did not wait for summons. He arrived at her Hamptons estate uninvited, astride a motorcycle that roared like rebellion. The guard at the gate hesitated. Olivia, watching from her balcony, told him to let Julian through. He removed his helmet, hair wild, eyes brighter than anger. Enough hiding, he said, voice carrying the weight of unspoken months. If you can't claim me, at least admit you feel me. Olivia, standing in linen trousers and the fragility of hesitation, wanted to deny him. Instead, she descended the marble steps and reached for the helmet. Where are we going? She asked. His smile was both challenge and forgiveness. Anywhere your courage lasts. The ride was a baptism. Coastal highways unfurled like ribbons. Wind ripped through her carefully set hair. Salt air drenched her lungs. For the first time in years, Olivia screamed, not in fear but in exhilaration. She clutched him tightly, not out of need, but out of desire to belong to this recklessness. They stopped at a cliff where the ocean threw itself against rocks with desperate grandeur. Dismounting, Julian pulled her close. His kiss was not a question but a declaration, tasting of wind and urgency. Her body answered with a language older than fear. For a suspended eternity, they were not a millionaire and a painter, not scandal and secret, but simply man and woman, two flames choosing to merge even if the world called it wildfire. When they broke apart, Olivia laughed, a sound rare enough to astonish herself. You'll destroy me, she whispered. No, Julian said, pressing his forehead to hers. I'll unmake the cage you mistook for armor. That night, back at the estate, their intimacy deepened, not through spectacle but through surrender. He painted her again, this time by candlelight, capturing not her elegance but her disheveled joy. She saw herself on canvas not as society's figurehead but as a woman alive with desire. She realized then that love was not the luxury she had denied herself, it was the rebellion she had been starving for. The game began innocently. A silk scarf, once used to blindfold her in his greenhouse surprise, returned to her hands. Again, she teased. Not blindness this time, he said, lifting it gently. Trust. He tied her wrists lightly, the knot deliberate but loose, symbolic rather than restrictive. She stood in the studio, candlelight painting shadows across her skin, her heart pounding with paradox. Olivia Harrington, the woman who commanded boardrooms, who bent empires to her will, allowed herself to be guided not as a prisoner but as a partner. Do you trust me? Julian asked. Yes, she whispered, surprised by her certainty. He circled her slowly like an artist studying form, then leaned close. Then let go. In that moment, Olivia realized the silk was not binding her, it was freeing her. For decades, control had been her armor. In surrendering it, she discovered vulnerability not as weakness but as revelation. She closed her eyes and exhaled, releasing the weight of decades. Julian kissed her wrist where the fabric lay, then untied the knot. The silk fell like a discarded fear. She wept, not from sorrow, but from the staggering relief of being known beyond her masks. Later they lay in silence, the air heavy with intimacy. Julian traced idle patterns along her arm, and she felt younger than her years, yet wiser than her fears. Freedom, he murmured, isn't them approving. It's you choosing. She turned to him, eyes luminous. Then I choose this. Whatever storm comes. The words, once unspeakable, now anchored her. And for the first time Olivia felt truly sovereign. The reckoning arrived at a charity gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and gossip, diamonds refracting envy. Olivia entered alone, draped in crimson silk that demanded attention. Julian stood across the room, unmasked, unapologetic. The crowd's murmur thickened as eyes darted between them. The moment stretched like a verdict. Olivia felt the familiar pull of caution. Retreat, preserve, survive. Yet Julian's gaze held her steady. He did not beckon. He simply waited as though her freedom was hers to claim. She walked toward him. Each step was defiance, each sway of her gown a declaration. Gasps rippled. Cameras erupted in a storm of light. Olivia slid her arm through Julian's, lifted her chin and smiled, not the rehearsed smile of society, but one radiant with authenticity. Whispers flared, venom and awe entwined. Yet Olivia felt lighter than she had in decades. She was not scandalized, she was alive. Her board would rage, her friends would gossip, her children might falter in understanding. But none of them could revoke the sanctuary she had found in Julian's presence. Love, she realized, was not an indulgence but a sovereign act, a reclamation of self. Julian leaned close, his voice a secret just for her. "Welcome to your freedom." She laughed softly, savoring the irony. "And to my scandal." He kissed her temple, and the ballroom dissolved into insignificance. Olivia Harrington, Empress of Towers, had finally stepped into the light, not as a woman protecting her image, but as a woman embracing her truth. For the first time in her empire of glass and steel, she was unbreakable.